Good evening. This is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is October 2021, and we're here together for a coronavirus conversation. I'll be doing most of the conversing unless you join in. I always appreciate your comments, questions, criticisms, and forwarding this, sharing it, and suggestions and so forth. Um, I'm going to probably do a little bit of a special presentation today. Previous episodes, I have had some guests, and I was pleased about 2 months ago, I believe, to get Marc Girardot, who is living in Paris, French, and a brilliant guy. He's not technically in the medical sphere, but his insights have been just spot on. And I had the pleasure of being in a Zoom call educational session a few days ago, and I got to hear one of his really interesting insight presentations. I'm going to try to capsulize it for you tonight, insofar as I can. He'll do a better job, and I hope to have him on the show again soon. But such as it is, I thought rather than wait, I would give my less complete version of his own story than he can. But such is life. I'm here and he's not. Um, I want to maybe touch on a few other kind of COVID news items. These are minor, um, but things that have been impacting me. I don't really see any major point anymore in wearing masks. Indoors, outdoors, and so forth. The people who care to be immunized have been. Um, there's a huge cohort of people, they're called children, who have not been immunized, nor do they need to be. Some of the points tonight will touch on that. Uh, and I think at some point, there's the story, The Emperor's New Clothes, which really refers to the emperor's not having any clothes. The clothiers have this, fictional fantasy mythical emperor. They try to, I don't know, save money or put one over on him or make fun of him for whatever reason, and they give him, some clothing they say is just amazing looking and so forth, but doesn't really exist. And he doesn't want to seem out of place. He doesn't want to doubt them, so he puts it on, and everyone's like, "Oh my God!" Nobody can tell him that he's not wearing anything, except in this case, probably in the children's book, his underwear. And so he goes out and about, and he's really proud of his garments. You start to believe they're real, and probably you know the story. And then a small child comes along and points out the emperor's new clothes are no clothes at all. And it's like, why aren't you wearing anything? And he goes back, the emperor goes back to his original supposition that he didn't see anything there. But he doesn't believe his own eyes. And sometimes we're in this world of the emperor's new clothes, the emperor's no clothes, and so forth, wearing masks as kind of this tacit agreement. We all have to agree to be wearing these things, even as some kind of courtesy. It's a little bit like in Japan, which is a very formal place, and there's a lot of bowing going on, and you don't want to be the one not to bow. So everyone's bowing, and sometimes the bowing continues, and people are bowing into their bowing and whatnot. And um, there's moments in which you just need to stop this particular cycle. I don't know if it's ever, I don't think it's the same in every state. In Massachusetts, ostensibly, we elected a Republican governor, Charlie Baker, but he understands the writing on the wall. This is a very a blue state, Democrat state, and he likes getting reelected, one assumes. And so he has sort of caved into pressure, and he applied during the Delta frenzy elsewhere, mind you, without much Delta going on here, to make an indoor mask mandate at this very, very, very late date when the Northeast had its major blow from COVID in the spring of 2020. It's now 2021, which by my calculation, let me just count this up, 21 minus 20, that's 1 year ago and more and counting. So this is months and months later, and we're effectively at a zero level fatalities from COVID, now Delta or not. And there are places that are getting COVID still currently. I think they're mostly in East Europe. I think Russia, the Ukraine, and so forth, or Ukraine. Are getting waves right now, but pretty much the things died down, died out, died off, and it's done. Those are all D words, which actually go with Delta, which is the Greek letter for D, or vice versa. Um, and there are people saying no. People have had issues with some of the politics coming out of sports, and it used to be sports was the um, kind of the exit, the panacea from the world's ills. You could just watch sports and not be concerned about that. It could kind of turn your political mind off and just get into sports. But this sports, such as it is, has brought politics to the forefront. became very racial, this, and the kneeling, so forth and so on. Anyway, I think you know that, but I have to applaud this, certain numbers of the NBA players who are standing up. It coincides with the oddity that, there was a recent protest in New York City where BLM joined up with kind of Trump supporters, generically, and in opposition to the um, mandate to produce papers to get into any establishment in New York City. And so they don't just have a mask requirement; you have to show your papers, your vaccine papers, to get in. And a lot of people have called this the new apartheid, because the blacks have the lowest percentage of being vaccinated of any ethnicity or race or whatever you want to call it in the country. And the NBA, obviously, if you've seen it, is majority, probably 70% black, and the whites, such as they are mostly European. So amongst Americans, it's even a higher fraction of black. And there's a fair amount of kind of we'll call it black quasi-nationalism running through the NBA, and it's slightly embodied in Kyrie Irving, who I think has his issues about the races and so forth. I'm not really in accord with him, but I applaud his independent thinking. It is not backing down, is not buckling under to a lot of pressure. And people keep thinking that he's not being a good teammate to his teammates because everyone else has backed down. And having had COVID or not, Kevin Durant had COVID famously more than a year ago, and he got the vaccine. Cam Newton had COVID. It's another sport, obviously, but he eventually got the vaccine because he wants to get back in the NFL. So players have sacrificed, and Cam Newton broke down because he's in a different position from Kyrie Irving, financially, in terms of their career and value, so forth. Kyrie's near the height, maybe a little bit past the height, but he's saying no and sacrificing a great deal of money. Cam Newton sacrificed less, but he wants to get back in, so he's sacrificing his, a little bit of his integrity, his ideals, and so forth. But neither one of them need this thing, and frankly, it's probably more dangerous if you've had the illness already. Anyway, to that point, I recommend you go look up Jonathan Isaac, or maybe it's Jonathan Isaacs with an S at the end. He's a forward with Orlando. He is probably the single most articulate sports person, at least in the NBA, probably throughout, articulating the rationale for his not taking the vaccine. He's a young man. There's more side effects from the vaccine for young men than from the illness. And it doesn't impede on anybody else. Nobody's getting the illness right now. These are all young, healthy men. The NBA, the NFL have lots of young, healthy men, and none of them have gotten, ill ostensibly in any, long-term way from COVID. So they get the flu every year. Nobody goes up in arms whether everyone's had the flu shot or not. I remember one year I thought I should hire myself on as a Los Angeles Lakers physician. I could have saved them millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, because the entire team was essentially turn by turn ablated 2 weeks at a time by one of the severe influenzas. And all I would have to do next year to prevent that was give everyone a flu shot. Now, it might have been a harder task than I would have thought because, some of the resistance and so forth. But, flu shots are great things. I'm not anti-vax. I'm pro-vax. I take a flu shot every single year. And I've been taking that. And I like other vaccines and so forth. So they're awesome things. But you needn't aim, the elephant gun at mosquitoes. And taking a fly swatter is not going to kill the elephant. So you need the right thing for the right problem. And this problem is really amongst the elderly and infirm. So I give my kudos to them. I recommend you look into that. And as far as Kyrie Irving not being a good teammate, I think Bill de Blasio is not a good mayor. I think that's really the issue. I think Charlie Baker, in a lot of ways, is not a good governor. He's not been listening to his own heart. I've spoken to him privately, and I think his beliefs are more in accord with what we're presenting here. I'm only generalizing that. I can't say that for sure. But, the political expedience. Bill de Blasio does not have to do this. New York has not had a Delta surge. Go look at the data and maybe, the data, and you can see that they have not had any real jump or spike in fatalities, such as other areas which didn't have the initial one in March, April 2020. So you either, there's an old commercial, you pay me now, you pay me later. That's one of those things. You either paid early on with severe COVID, like certain places, Bergamo, Italy and whatnot, or you pay later by hiding out like an ostrich and so forth, you get it later. So the immunity does work. You're better off getting it. And the vaccines have been good for the people, in severe risk, but not necessarily for everybody else. And overall, herd immunity is a much more, you know, uh, um, how would you call it? I guess better, easy word. Um, it gives a fuller presentation of the virus for your immune system, so you're able to, deal with all different types of, variants that come up later on, as opposed to just the spike protein, which might, change, and then you can't recognize the new variant as it comes in. So let's see if I can kind of go through Marc Giraudeau's slides, um, and let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. But here we have. Different perspective on anti-COVID vaccines. Panda is pandata.org. Marc Giraudeau is over here. Let me make sure I have this up. Yes, I do have it up on my screen. What are the root causes of severe COVID? Why current vaccine technologies for COVID aren't necessarily as effective as they could be? Have they been harmful? Are these vaccines always, why are these vaccines always unwarranted? I don't necessarily go that far. And so he gives some of his bona fides here. And the main message, anti-COVID vaccines were never needed for the general population. So, in my taste, I think people under 50 who are in good health would do better, in a sense, to get the virus than the vaccine. Chickenpox parties, rubella parties were a thing in the 1950s, and people went out of their way to get the illness, even though they're at the tail end, there were some vaccines available because the illness was well known and people didn't have any problems. The kids in particular didn't have any problems from the illness, and they saved themselves a lot later on by having the better immunity. His other point is, if you were going to do a vaccine, you should do it in the mucosal surfaces. What are mucosal surfaces? That's I'm pointing, you're inside the red moist parts of your mouth and nose, inside your throat, down your pulmonary tract. Those are mucosal surfaces. If they produce mucus, they're kind of soft and slimy when you touch them. You have other mucosal surfaces, you probably know where. But in this sense, if you had an inhaled vaccine, a spray, something like that, like people use for allergies and whatnot, that would probably be a better idea, but you probably couldn't do the mRNA versions per se. And another point is, when these mRNA, like little vacuoles, are injected in the blood, they probably can do more harm by spreading. And it's possible that some of the myocarditis is secondary to the vaccine spreading amongst the muscles. We don't really know. Some of his points, I can't do his slides as well as he can, but evolution is our best compass. Like, how did we survive this long without vaccines? Well, we we have a really awesome immunity. Frankly, all the other animals on Earth do as well, and there's different levels of immunity. There's kind of a first level general immunity. So this one he points out here, the evolution choose the first tier immunity. Why should we choose a second tier, that is a vaccine immunity, when we have a natural immunity? And so there are some key facts about SARS. If I'm going to maybe just skip over some of these. Kids don't die of COVID. So the elderly die of COVID. It's more, in their case, it's more about the fact that their immune system has gotten old. The fact that kids don't die of COVID shows that it's not necessarily about one particular antigen targeted or not, like that is to say spike protein, because the kids don't have history. I'm going to go maybe skip to one of his slides here. This is a little bit, the accrual of immunity over time. So the first year of your life, you have good super immunity. You're kind of immune to like anything that comes across the board. Everything's recognized as foreign if it's not part of you, but you don't have like the memory bank of immunity. So these are the different ones. You have a lifelong immune repertoire. As you live, you come across more colds, the rubella, chickenpox, this kind of stuff. And so as you this is the first few years of life, and then he's doing decades. So in the first few years of life, you're getting more colds, more sneezes, that kind of stuff, and you're building up some of these different kinds of immunity. He categorizes them as lifelong immunity, kind of super immunity when you've had something, and you're kind of stay super immune for a couple of years, and then you lose some of it. This is the kind of the faded one over here. As you get older, you're losing your teeth, you're losing your hair, you're losing your faculties, you're losing your kidney function, you're losing your arterial function, and you're probably losing some of your immune memory. And so there are some of the, I guess these are, maybe 10% of the population each. Some people, when they get in contact with the virus, will pass away, and some of them are going to be very unprotected. This is your vaccine cohort over here. And mind you, everybody's kind of going to get it probably out, almost every adult's gotten it and so forth, but they don't necessarily all need it, because some of the um, immunity is there already. I mean, the fact that kids don't have this library of illnesses, yet they do really well with COVID, somewhat shows it different from the Spanish flu, which, got a lot of the young people, but not the elderly, because they probably had some of the resident immunity. So let's see if I can go back and make some sense of his slides. Again, so that's, I think, some of the point here. He brings out the obese diet from COVID. Not everybody obese, but I think it's as you age, as you get more severe obesity. I don't think it's necessarily my own feeling. People point to the obesity, metabolic syndrome, and so forth. My own feeling, I've mentioned before, is that I believe as you get obese, you get kind of a Pickwickian syndrome. You get really hard. It's hard to move your lungs in and out because there's so much weight, on your diaphragm. There's so much weight when you're lying down, and you collect mucus more. And I think that makes a more fertile environment for the virus and or any secondary bacteria that cause pneumonia. Let's see. And then he goes on to some, specific facts, which I'm not going to, I think recommend you maybe pause this and go over it in part yourself. The fact that COVID is a coronavirus, and coronavirus is about 1/5 or 1/6 of all the common colds, is that there are going to be some cross reactivity between SARS-CoV-2 and regular old colds. And so people, are going to have some experience with this and probably have a reasonable way of getting rid of it. So if you're not in the super elderly and kind of getting, your immune system kind of crotchety and old, but you're in this, younger zone here, you've had some experience, you either have, had a coronavirus cold within the last couple of years, or you basically have, a good immune repertoire that you've built up. So by the time you're 20, 30 years old, you've seen enough illnesses, colds and whatnot, that you are going to do very well against COVID in general, because you have some of the kind of like youthful immune blockage from on a first level, and you're going to have some of this being able to call up your own kind of Library of Congress worth of immune antibodies and whatnot, and get rid of any COVID. So that's one way of looking at this. So the immunocompromised don't respond to the vaccines. This might, in some way be related to Colin Powell's recent death. People are making whatever they want to politically of it, which I think is sad. I respect the man. He passed away. God bless him. May he rest in peace. But Colin Powell had, I think, multiple myeloma, which is a cancer of the inside your bones of the immune type cells. And so he, either between that or the treatment thereof, he probably has some immunocompromise. He had a vaccine, but he died with or from COVID anyway. That's, they're not going to, he's kind of out of this category. I don't think this says anything about the vaccine. I think it says a lot about his illness and a lot about his age. He's in his 80s and so forth. So, this is not going to really help the immunocompromised. This is one reason there's no HIV vaccine, because HIV essentially is, immunocompromised itself. I mean, that is the problem. So you can't really get, it affects your immune system. You can't really mount your immune system if HIV attacks the immune system. So let's see. Anyway, so kind of moving along his slides again, he kind of breaks this down and showing, who is getting more ill from COVID. So the immunocompromised, this is a lot of the elderly and people with other illnesses and so forth. And, he's pointing out who's likely to pass through to this danger zone. So over here are the asymptomatic, and over here are those who are going to do poorly. There's higher rates of hospitalization and so forth. And probably a higher inoculum, more stuff flowing at you at one given time. So a real hearty sneeze in your face is like that. That probably is the best and only use case for masks, is preventing somebody who has the illness from spraying it out. They're not really going to work on the receptive end. And he presents obesity as chronic inflammation. Again, I have some little kind of queries about that and misgivings. And and here you go towards higher rates of problems per se. And so his point here is that the current vaccine technologies aren't addressing any of the root causes of severe COVID. And so he has these in the shaded boxes here. It's not it's not really addressing the fact that there are different doses being given to people. It's not addressing obesity. It's not addressing the pulmonary cell-to-cell delayed response and some of the acceleration that happens with high ACE2 density. And so these are not, you're not really parsing this out. If you could parse this out, you could work on different types of treatments or prevention based on who people are and what their likely benefits are. So there might be certain cases, particularly amongst immunocompromised, where treatment, whether it's antibiotics or something of that sort, antivirals, would do better than vaccine. And this has never been the case with this problem. With COVID, as opposed to HIV, for instance, which is treated almost exclusively with medication, zero vaccines. And then this is, I'm not going to, I can't do his as well as he does his talk here. So again, maybe we can have him in. So there are so many inconsistencies, confusing COVID fatalities with vaccine adverse effects. So I'm kind of going to go, maybe skip a slide over here. There are probably more vaccine problems than have been reported. I think there's a bias against it amongst the medical establishment. You don't want to be the guy in the hospital that kind of ruins the vaccine for everybody else. But this is year by year by year VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And this is, it's kind of not a perfect system because this is based on deaths reported to it. It's not an active system, it's a passive system. But this is year by year. If you maybe make this a little bit bigger. 1990, this is basically flu shots and all the other vaccines that people get. This is the level of problems that people are having. This is actually reports of death. They're very, very low to minimal. And all of a sudden we have 2020, 2021. So we have far more reports of death from this vaccine than from the total of all the other vaccines we've had for the previous, how many decades is that? 3 decades. So, we've heard that there are, thousands of deaths, but there may be more than that, excess deaths. The underreporting is, it's going to be hard to really go over here, but there are kind of reasonable, I guess, probabilistic data analyses that show that the numbers have been underreported. So it's called the URF, the underreporting factor, or ERF. And this is some of the reports of death based on vaccine doses. So most of the deaths, you could say, well, a lot of these deaths, people dying from other things, but most of the deaths reported are within a couple days of the vaccine. So let's see what else we got here. Oops, didn't mean to make that too small. So I'll leave some of this for him to do. Maybe we'll just read the headlines. It shouldn't be surprised that so many adverse events occur with intramuscular vaccines in general. And maybe you'll pause this and look at it yourself. I'm not going to be able to really go over it in depth in this, talk. But please pause it and take a look at it yourself. Immunocompromised might end up producing much more spike protein than healthy individuals. I would have to think hard on this one. I can't really speak to it directly, but again, maybe Mark can. But I imagine that would be because you don't have kind of the broad immunity that you had before. So when you get this one spike protein in large number, you're going to be producing, I'm going to have a hard time. Maybe because your own immune system can't cut off the production of spike protein from the vaccine that you receive, that you're not going to be able to turn it off as much, and you might get more problems secondarily from the spike protein. Does that make any sense? Because you're making the spike protein. Once you get the vaccine injection, the mRNA is inserting it into your cells, and you are producing spike protein instead of the virus. And the idea is that you are going to be able to head off the next time it shows up by the virus instead of by your arm, by your muscle. And then we just go over this one slide here, and I'll probably call it a day. This is people confusing COVID fatalities with vaccine adverse effects. So there are a lot of inconsistencies, and maybe we'll just go over the one in the middle here. 111 is 911, what we have for emergency calls in the UK. So they have 111. And throughout this winter death, though the winter, this winter death toll was higher than in 2020, the emergency calls were uncorrelated in 2021. So these are COVID deaths over here, but people are not calling the emergency room anymore. They're not calling the emergency line. So over here, the deaths went up when the calls, these correlate. So if you look, I guess maybe make this a little bit bigger. So these are the emergency calls in the UK, and they went up during COVID. Okay, people are like, oh, I'm sick, I can't breathe, blah, blah, blah. They're calling, 911. And this happened again over here. They're calling 911. A little bit less so because people were more familiar with COVID. And now they're having a little bit of a spike over here, but not a spike of deaths, that is, but nobody's calling 911, 111 at all. And so maybe they're not having emergency cases such as from the illness, and the deaths are going up because they show up as a positive test, but they'll show up as a positive test from the vaccine as well. So it's possible that they are having some of the, I guess the theory here is that there are more vaccine adverse effects than you are calling them, and you're calling them deaths from COVID rather than deaths from the COVID vaccine. And I think I'm going to call it a day on that, because again, these aren't my slides, and I think I did pretty well, frankly, given that somebody else's work going over it. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. I think the major message here is that you have to stay strong. You should figure out ways to deal with this, and be the one who points out the emperor's new clothes are no clothes. If you have children, I don't recommend they get the vaccine. I think that is not really in there unless they have cystic fibrosis or lymphoma, leukemia or something like that. If they just are regular healthy kids running around, normal size, a normal body habitus, they're not morbidly obese and so forth, not without pulmonary problems and whatnot. If they're healthy, I think normal natural immunity is the right way to go, and there are countries that prove it. I'd be happy to go over this in detail. Person to person, obviously, there are big social reasons why people are doing what they do, because they want to go on airplanes and so forth. But on a personal health basis, I don't think Kyrie Irving is wrong. I don't think Jonathan Isaacs is wrong. I think they are young, healthy men, and they should do what young, healthy men have done forever, which is be young, healthy men. And again, Kyrie Irving, I'm fairly certain, already had the illness anyway. I think Jonathan Isaacs already had the illness anyway, and they are fine. Nothing's happening to the NBA when they do these protocols. Nothing's happening to the rest of the NFL when they do these crazy protocols, except they ruin people's lives. They sort of ruin Cam Newton's life. I'm not saying he's the exemplar and so forth, because he got Bill Belichick a little irritated and so forth by not showing up for practice, by going to a party, and then he couldn't come back in. So it was really the interface between Cam Newton and the protocols. If there hadn't been the protocols, he might have had a problem anyway. I don't think he's as good a quarterback as Mac Jones, but he shouldn't have lost his job the way he did. And so that's what I look at. And Kyrie Irving shouldn't be losing the job that he's, maybe losing as it stands. He should be able to play. And it's not Kyrie Irving's problem. It's change the mayor. Don't change Kyrie Irving. The mayor, is going to be gone in a couple months anyway. And frankly, while he's a lame duck, he should, lay off this stuff, because nothing's happening in terms of illnesses and fatalities. And you can check the Worldometer. I'm not going to do that tonight. I do that many weeks. Just go to worldometer.info or something like that and check, country by country, state by state, and so forth. You'll see that this is over. And people don't realize it. they're doing it for other reasons. They're doing because they have had such an awesome time with this. The fact that we're still masking our children in schools is basically criminal. If you vaccinate the children who are healthy, I think that's criminal as well. I think that this is something that where sanity is warranted, and it's in short supply. And as far as stores and whatnot, I've been in a lot of stores, box stores and whatnot. Big retail outlets, and there's some people not wearing masks, and nobody stops them. Nobody really gives them a second thought. Everybody knows this is just to keep Big Brother happy. And so we didn't sign up for a Big Brother state. And if you want to live in one, well, cool, go find one, but not mine. And you have to live with freedom. And but politely just say, no, you have medical issues that, may preclude you wearing one or something like that. Maybe you have anxiety or phobias and so forth. But, there's no reason that the lowest common denominator should win out on this. So I think that's it for tonight. I wish you well, and please, be in touch.